there, what I'll ask each of our panelists to do in order is introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they do and the firm they represent, how that works, and then we'll move forward into the rest of the webinar. So with that said, Katie, have you been able to join us successfully? We did have a little technical difficulty. So not hearing Katie quite yet. I'll start with Andrew.
Sure thing. Hello. Thanks, Bill. I am the head of Neurologic. We have an artificial intelligence software development platform, and we're working with law firms, corporate legal departments, and compliance groups to help them build apps that really help automate the delivery of legal services, expert advisor apps that can run factual scenarios against compliance and legal framework to provide answers, reports, highlight areas of risk or areas of non-compliance. We also do quite a bit in the document automation space, again, querying users and building legal documents, whether it's contracts, non-disclosure agreements. We also automate the generation of pleadings for particular matter types, and we have a significant team in the US out of Manhattan, and we also do business in Europe and Australia.
That's great, Andrew. Thank you very much. Ryan.
Hey, good morning. My name is Ryan Schlunz. As Bill said, I'm the Chief Information and Innovation Officer at Stoll Reeves. About 3 years ago, I stepped into the Chief Innovation Officer role, and in that role, I'm tasked with helping our attorneys work with their clients on new and different ways of delivering legal services. We have a little over 350 attorneys. We're headquartered in the Pacific Northwest. I'm based out of Portland, Oregon, but we have offices in 12 different cities around the United States where we serve corporate, energy, environmental, intellectual property, labor and employment needs for small, mid-sized, and large U.S. companies. I also wear the hat of Chief Information Officer, and in that role, it's a pretty traditional CIO role where I oversee the technology and information management needs of the firm. I've been doing that for law firms for, I think it'll be 21 years come January. So.
Thank you, Ryan. So we're still working to get Katie online here a little bit, and so we'll introduce her as soon as we've successfully managed that. We're having apparently a solar flare or something affecting Denver area. So with that, what I'd like to transition into our next section. Is to talk a little bit about how we define artificial intelligence. And for that, Andrew, would you kick us off?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, I think it's important to level set. This is one of probably the more hotly contested areas is, what truly constitutes AI. And I think at the core, AI is really any technology that performs cognitive tasks that typically believed to require a human intelligence. And so we're all interfacing with these devices daily, whether it's Siri, Alexa, whatnot. People talk about AI as being one thing, but certainly it's a combination of technologies, from machine learning to natural language processing to neural networks to rules and expert systems. So when we think about that, AI really performs tasks through rules applied to data to reach a conclusion. And that can happen through an algorithm. It can happen by building a system. When we think about it in the context of legal, the conclusions that typically are drawn might include identifying or categorizing patterns in the case of contract review or electronic discovery. There's a lot of technologies out there that are focused on determining relevance when we think about legal research. And then lastly, predicting outcomes and really determining compliance. Are we in or out of compliance with a certain framework, and identifying best practices, and really that's through the application of expert systems. If you want to scroll on, certainly.
We'll go to the next slide.
Perfect. you know, a lot of clients will come to us and say, hey, let's do a project on AI, and I think it's always important to sort of step back and say, how do you know that you need AI? And really, if you're looking at problems that can be solved through trained algorithms on the pattern recognition and prediction side, or rules-based decisioning on the expert system side, then it's quite likely that, you know, the problem that you're looking at can be solved through an AI technology that's available today. We always talk about business models, particularly in legal. You know, the traditional business model on the law firm side has been an hourly model of time and materials. And when we think about automating and really driving efficiencies in a new way to deliver legal services to the market, it's important to sort of step back and think about what are we trying to achieve, and what are the story that we want to tell across our organization, you know, in the next 90 days. We always talk about leveraging proof of concepts, really to build organizational consensus and get a broad set of stakeholders on board with the potential success of a project. And then asking, are we trying to lower our cost, service delivery? Are we looking for higher and more consistent quality of answers? When we think about delivering legal advice, you know, greater consistency, are we really looking to free up a lawyer's time to really shift those resources from rote, repetitive work that might be better handled by a technology solution so that lawyers can focus on some of the more complex, bespoke work and truly drive that value, whether they're at a law firm or a corporate legal department.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next element here, a couple things I'd like to mention for the audience at large. You'll hear a lot of references today since our panelists are both two of our panelists represent large law firms. Obviously, savings in the legal area and opportunities for the use of AI affect every company since, for better or worse, legal costs are an important part of how we all manage a business today. But bear in mind that all of these solutions we'll talk about will be generally applicable to companies at large. Now, we also have a Q&A capability here. So for all of our audience attendees, if a question comes up or you have something you'd like to address to one or more of the panelists, please feel free to put that into the Q&A. I will be taking those questions as we move forward during the webinar in order to make sure that we're getting a chance to get to all of your questions, all of your input. So please do that. In the meantime, for a minute, I'd like to turn back to Ryan Schlunz. Ryan, would you like to share for the audience for a moment a little bit about your perspective and Stoll Reeves' perspective on the use of AI and these tools?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. You know, it's an interesting topic. When I first started presenting it to our partnership here, and I had to not dance around the topic of artificial intelligence replacing computer intelligence. That's a difficult topic to bring up to a room full of really intelligent human beings. And so, you know, when I think of AI, especially as it serves our industry, I like to think of it as really just a bunch of math that we can use to help us perform some of the work we do more efficiently and more effectively. And like math, you have many different math solutions or different types of math that you can use to solve different work problems. And you know, as I start approaching it that way, and I start talking about especially to our lawyers, saying that we could use math to help us perform legal research faster, I start to open up. They go, well, what do you mean we can use math to perform legal? Because legal research takes an awful long time, and sometimes our clients don't like to pay us to perform the legal research. So I'm all ears. When I talk about, if I were to approach it to talk about the technology in terms of, we've got a computer that can, you know, do your legal research for you instead of you doing for it, it rubs them the wrong way. And so I talk about it in terms of you know, the problem we're trying to solve, a business problem that we're trying to solve, or a business problem that maybe, or a workflow problem that they have. You know, Andrew mentioned, you know, expert systems. The TurboTax analogy is a really easy one to get people to think through. That you can apply artificial intelligence algorithms or have math help you fill out a form just by answering a couple of questions. It can answer, a couple more for you and fill out a form. So something as simple as that is a way that helps our lawyers think about it, because an awful lot of what they do is create documents, and so automating some of that document creation by just answering a couple of questions, such as what is the jurisdiction we're talking about, and what is the defendant type in this, or what is the issue type in this, will help them to fill out other parts of the document. That resonates pretty well for them. So I try to keep it at that level and just talk about AI in terms of being math that we can use, and a lot of different math that we can use to help us solve a lot of different problems. And then we start talking about what the actual problems are and issues are, and focus on that, and then go look for the right AI.
Thank you very much, Ryan. One of the other things that we're, as I mentioned to the audience at large, I'll just ask right now, Katie DeBoard, are you able to hear us and speak?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yay! Sorry about that all. It's always ironic when you have tech problems and these things. I'm glad you can hear me. The good thing is that I've heard most of what you all were saying, so you just couldn't hear me.
So, Katie, we went through, as you know, a few of the slides that Andrew prepared, and Ryan just talked about the perspective from Stoll Reeves. Right now, we're sharing the slide that you created about decision-making and decision-making support use cases. So if we can pick it up from there, perhaps you can describe the Ryan Cave approach to AI in these tools, and as all part of our introductory element here to kind of explain the point of view on AI that you're taking. So we teed up the decision-making support use cases for you.
Sure. No, that sounds great. I think I echo what Ryan and Andrew have said about the use cases for AI and where we start. Really, at Bryan Cave, we look at AI in the context of making sense out of unstructured data. We look at it in the context, as Andrew had it flashed previously, of identifying patterns, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. And then the final one, which is what Ryan was just referring to, is both document automation as well as what I would call analytical automation. And these three use cases that are shown currently are examples of sort of a combined document and analytical automation, where you want a document that's generated at the end, but you have to answer a series of questions in order to get to that document, and those series of questions may yield other questions depending on the answers. Just for kind of specific example, given the audience, the term sheet generator was built for a client to use in-house. So essentially, the client business units use that tool in order to generate term sheets with various vendors, and it essentially takes some of the load off the law departments. It creates consistency, and then you can retain the data at the back end in terms of what you've contracted for, where, and maybe some sticking points in terms of what you might not want to do in the future. The NDA generator is very similar. Something that is a routine document for businesses to create that shouldn't require a lot of attorney time, and many, many other use cases that I think Andrew is going to speak to a little bit more.
Thank you very much, Katie. By the way, because we had a small technical issue coming in, I didn't give you the same opportunity as I gave Ryan and Andrew, which is just to introduce yourself, your role at Bryan Cave.
Sure. So I'm Katie DeBoard. I was a commercial litigator for 15 years, was a litigation partner at Bryan Cave until about 2015, and essentially what happened was, as a litigator, I think I might have been too vocal about things I thought that we should be looking at or focusing on, and ways that we could start helping clients receive legal services in a different way. And the firm initiated a new strategic plan when when our new chair stepped in 2014. And the result of that strategic plan was that innovation became one of Brian Cave's 3 pillars. And because of my conversations and my interest, once innovation became a primary component of our strategy, the firm wanted somebody to be in charge of that pillar and in charge of our global strategic direction as far as innovation. And I stepped into that role. And it's been a really interesting and cool transition in terms of, thinking about things from the practical law side, the client service delivery side, and the tech side. I do not have a technology background, but in some ways, I rely a lot on the technology expertise of my teams. But having the legal background, I think, has helped me get a clearer picture of where we should go and why and when and how to have the change management associated with all of that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. We had also as part of the introductory form here, we thought we'd get a sense of our audience and who our audience is and where everyone is kind of sitting in this process. So we're going to, over the next couple of minutes, just get an idea. This will allow everyone really in the audience to see where everyone is. So we're going to be using the polling tool. You're seeing that up on the screen now. I'll walk through it for a moment. There are some differences on devices. So if you have a mobile device, when the poll comes up on your screen, it's going to ask permission for you to view it. That's on an iPhone. We did not get to test an Android, so I'm not positive about that. But just say yes. You'll get your 4 choices. You'll have to hit submit. On an iPhone, you'll have to hit further a yes, do you really want to submit? And then that will allow us to go through the process. So our first question for the poll today is, when you think about where you are on the AI continuum, where's your organization today? And our choices are still kind of in the fact-gathering stage. Are you in a proof of concept? So maybe your initial proof of concept with one in place. You've got proof of concept phase with multiple proof of concepts going, or you're at the leading edge where you actually have successful deployments with one or more than one AI projects that are actually into implementation beyond the POC. So now we're going to go ahead and push out the poll. You'll have about 30 seconds to make your selection. And so now everyone should be seeing the poll. We're beginning to see examples come through with people voting. And you can see the process going down. We got about 10 seconds left on that. And as soon as that time expires here, then we'll close the poll and push that out, and we can get an idea where our audience is sitting in this. So off we go. And now we'll show the poll results. So hopefully everyone is seeing this now. For those of you who might be having, 45% of our audience reports that it's still in the fact-gathering phase. Just 9% of you are at the proof of concept phase, but a pretty healthy 18% of you are into the proof of concept phase with multiple POCs, and even better, another 18% have actually deployed some AI. So having done this similar survey in a couple of other contexts over the last couple of months, I can tell you that our audience here is a little more sophisticated than the average audience we've spoken to. So that's great news, and that'll allow all of our comments on the panel to look at that. Let's go ahead and we'll look at the next slide in the next poll. This will be our last one for this session today. So here, now again, these choices are going to look very much legal industry focused. So we know that while a number of you do represent other large law firms, there are a number of you here that represent large enterprise as well. So if you and your law firm are doing this, these may be applicable. If not, just click on the one that's most interesting to you. And of course, expertise automation can go well beyond law firm practice. Similarly with predictive uses, so whether that's predictive users on outcomes or rulings we might expect in a legal context, it can also come out to a lot of different things if you're trying to forecast other types of activity, whether it be customer or client, or perhaps even markets. And of course, contract analysis is fairly universal. Clicked on electronic discovery a little more narrow. So let's go ahead and open that poll. And everyone can start making a selection now. So we're just about to wrap up the poll in just about 2 more seconds. As we anticipated, a number of you, 35%, didn't have an answer because it wasn't applicable to your case, but expertise automation was the #1 selection at 35%, followed by 20% looking at predictive outcomes. So we're seeing a balance in a few folks selecting either of contract analysis or electronic discovery. So let's go ahead and then move into the meat of the session here. And what we wanted to do here was talk a little bit about what are some examples of current artificial intelligence projects that our panelists are working on at their firms. And to kick that off, we're going to turn back to Katie for a moment. And Katie, you'll talk us through the first one here, which is?
Yeah, so, and this is actually a tool that we created in 2012, but we are still using it today. And this is what we call the Tasker tool. And this is I like this example simply because it's an easy way to show what you can do with unstructured data. We had an insurance company who needed to make sense out of their time entries, and the ABA codes weren't good enough for them to really understand the budget for various activities and what they could expect in the coming year. And so we created a classifier and a tool to essentially teach a program what specific time entries related to. So if you flip to the next slide, Bill, the Tasker tool training interface, you'll see this is an example of securities filings that was used for a different client, where we are training the tool to understand that certain tasks relate to certain types of securities filings so that the clients can drill down on that specific filing type and what they can expect and how long it will take. We use this tool regularly when we are pricing work with clients and working on a budget because it's important for us to have this data, and as I think most people know, the more data you have, the more reliable it is and the more you can use it. So because we use this tool regularly to make sense out of what work product relates to what and how long work product really takes and how much it costs, we're able to apply that to pricing and really have a far better understanding about what our budget should look like.
Katie, the implication here is that this is a much more transparent interaction between your firm and the client. Is that essentially correct? Because all of this visibility and cost, is that provided out to the clients themselves?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's absolutely part of the point is making it all more transparent, and instead of throwing something at the wall in terms of an estimate based on prior work, we really have some data behind how much things should cost, and then candidly we use that same data to look at, okay, what should be automated, what is taking too long, and how can we reduce the cost and time of certain tasks that are appropriate for automation using AI and machine learning-based tools.
Yeah, so then you've made some extensions to that process, correct?
Yeah, so if you look at the next slide, the extension of the Tasker tool, this is just a word cloud that we provide to attorneys to give them a sense of the most repeated words that they use in their time entries, because part of it is correctly stating what they're working on so that we have the right data. So if they're being too generic, then they can see through this visual, okay, maybe I'm being too generic. But it's also communicating value. You know, if your biggest word is conference with or correspond with, you know, it gives the attorneys a better idea of, am I really conveying the correct value to this client? Do we need to think about how we're conveying our value and how we're talking to the clients about that?
Thank you. This is this looking at the word cloud and the things that attorneys talk about all the time. I'm sure everyone on the phone can appreciate having seen some of these. I'm going to take this slightly out of order based on our presentation, but Ryan, maybe this would be a good time for you to step in and talk about something that you're doing at Stoll.
Sure, I'd be happy to. You know, we start as we start with many projects here, trying to identify where we have pain points or where our clients have pain points. And so we started about 3 years ago with our first implementation of an artificial intelligence project, and it was related to electronic discovery. We were getting a lot of pushback from our clients who, on the litigation side, where we have a number of smaller and mid-sized clients that we serve in litigation about the cost of electronic discovery. And so we set out to try and identify how we can lower the costs of electronic discovery for our clients that we serve in litigation cases. We also had a need to upgrade our document review platform that we were using internally. It wasn't keeping up with the pace of litigation that our clients were putting us through or hiring us to help them with. And so we were doing a lot of outsourcing of the technology, and that was really expensive for our clients. And so we identified two things that we could do. One, we could speed up the time it takes us to do document review by bringing in some artificial intelligence technology that helps us automate the review of large collections of documents that are involved in electronic discovery, and using technology-assisted review rather than a traditional attorney review where you review every document just linearly. You just go through every single one and you mark them. This one's responsive. This one's not responsive. This one has issues in it that are key and flag every single document. Instead, we use technology to mark up a subset of the documents and then hand it off to the computer and tell it to go find us more that are like this one. And so it brings them back another sample set and asks us to score it, the computer, and how accurate it was. And so a human then goes and reviews the subset the computer brought back and says, we say, yeah, you got this one right, you got this one right. Nah, this one's wrong. This one's actually coded like this. And you go through that process a couple of iterations, and the computer just gets smarter and smarter, and it learns from the human interaction. And instead of reviewing all million documents, you might be reviewing a few thousand of the documents, and then the computer can actually score itself too based on how you've been scoring it and tell you how accurate it is. And then it can process through it far faster than the human can. So a human, instead of reviewing a million documents and taking 10 humans 100 hours of attorney time, which is then all billable to the client to do it, you might cut that down to maybe by 50, 60, 70, 80% depends on how large the collection of documents is. And so you're billing your client less, and you're getting to the answers and to the review of all the documents done faster. So you're delivering a higher quality product at a lower cost to your clients, and then the larger, the cost comes down tremendously. The second thing that we implemented is we were able to bring that in-house, that technology in-house, and not through the use of any artificial intelligence, but just through the use of leveraging shared and cloud-based infrastructure services. We're able to bring it in-house for a lot lower cost than we ever could have in the past. And so now, instead of passing through bills on an annual basis in excess of $20 million to our clients for electronic discovery and hosting and document review, we keep it in-house and capture our own revenue to help offset our cost. That's maybe 10% of that cost, of the original cost. It's a pretty impressive use of both technology and artificial intelligence. We then turned to legal research automation earlier this year, late last year, and then earlier this year, bringing in some outside technology that helps us review briefs very quickly and helps to provide us with citations and relevant law that was not cited in the brief, either to help us craft a response in opposition to opposing counsel's brief, or to help us identify things that we may have left out of our brief that we might want. It might make our case stronger. And so, that automation for some people, doesn't provide a tremendous amount of value. It's just sort of a last-minute sanity check to make sure that they dotted all their I's and crossed all their T's. And then for others, it cuts down on 10 hours worth of manual legal research that they would otherwise be doing on their own to go find the same data and information. And it's a couple of second-long process of reviewing a document. Like what Katie's firm did many years ago now, time entry coding is a project that we're taking today. We started it probably about 6 or 8 months ago, but we're looking to bring in some technology to help us automate the coding of time entries, in part so that we provide better visibility to our clients as to what we're working on, but also in part to provide us better visibility into what our time is costing us, what it is we're busy working on, and then how we can become more effective and improve on that. We've also launched a document automation project this year that is largely completed. Doesn't use a tremendous amount of artificial intelligence, but it certainly falls in the category of expert systems where we're programming a document to be a smart document, so that you, like TurboTax, answer a couple of questions, and the document will then answer several more for you without you having to go and copy and paste or fill out additional stuff. So it can make some decisions the technology can make some decisions for you for what the rest of the document looks like. And then next year, we've got one slated for doing document review of corporate contracts. So much like the review of litigation documents in e-discovery, we're wanting to automate the review of large amounts of contracts that are part of a due diligence process for mergers and acquisitions. So we receive a bunch of documents, and right now the process is to search and scan and copy and paste, different clauses and issues from each of the contracts into another system or an Excel spreadsheet, and it's a manual process done by attorneys who then bill that time to our clients. And we've recognized a need based largely on our clients pushing back and telling us that they don't want to pay as much as they used to for the diligence review portion of our merger and acquisition deals. And so we're working to automate that so that we can offer more predictable pricing to our clients in contract review, or at least in the due diligence portion of merger and acquisition deals.
That's an amazing amount of progress and changes of tools and changes in process, Ryan. It can't be lost on anyone in the audience that we're seeing what, to me, I've been involved in the practice of law myself for 30-some-odd years, is the largest set of changes and an accelerating pace of these changes. Andrew, you've done some work in some of these areas as well. Would you like to share with the audience one of the projects that you've worked on?
Sure, yeah. We have a lot of clients building interesting use cases on the platform, and I would say right now there's been a surge in GDPR apps with the coming rule changes in May of next year around the EU's framework for how organizations capture, store, retrieve, and access personal information that they may have on really anyone. And this applies to any organization doing business in the EU. And so everyone's struggling to understand what is our current processes for how we store personal information, how we categorize it, retrieve it, and really looking at, is our organization ready? Are we in compliance with the coming rule changes? So we have a handful of clients building organizational readiness assessment apps that really look at what are their current practices and protocols. It runs it against the requirements of GDPR, and it highlights areas of risk or areas where they may need to modify their current business practices. We also have, Katie and her team are doing a really interesting app around categorizing where PI is stored at the individual level across an organization. Everyone is expecting this influx of information requests from individuals saying, what PI do you have on me? That's incorrect, can you update it? Please delete it. I want to exercise my right to be forgotten, because GDPR provides all sorts of protection at the individual level around PI and how their data is being stored. So there's a lot of really innovative use cases, both to confirm compliance, highlight areas where you may need to modify your business practices, but then really creating more efficient workflows to answer what should be an influx of requests associated with the GDPR changes. We also see a lot of clients in the document automation space that have moved beyond automating standard documents, whether it's a contract or a partnership agreement or a non-disclosure agreement, and getting after pleadings and looking at, well, what are the pleadings that we're generating on a regular basis, and are there practice areas that are really, really high volume, but there's not a lot of variation across a pleading type. And so I know Katie and her team are looking at foreclosure pleadings and automating the creation there, which is a perfect example of where you can leverage a technology solution to drive quite a bit of efficiencies, and just identifying what the foreclosure proceeding is this, capturing some other data elements, what substantive issues might need to be included in the proceeding, what jurisdiction is it, and suddenly you have a brief constructed that's appropriate for the particular jurisdiction based on really what is the substance of your matter. We're working with another firm who's looking at automating the creation of intellectual property pleadings over the first 12 months of a matter. So really, really forward-thinking firms getting after sort of what are the next categories in document automation.
And Andrew, it's evident from some of the examples you cite, whether that was foreclosure proceedings or issues related to privacy in the EU or others, that these affect not just law firms, obviously, but any companies that do business internationally or any of these other elements. Katie, for our final example, we'll turn back to you, so we'll jump up to that next slide, which was here, your example of serial litigation.
Sure. So it's really hard to predict case outcomes. There's so many human variables associated with it, but there are certain things that we found that can be predictors that can influence decision making throughout a litigation, and this is one example of what we've done in this area. We had a large nationwide financial institution that had a flood of litigation, stemming from the financial crisis and foreclosure litigation, and the problem was that they needed to resolve cases faster and get costs down. And so what we did was we set up a single system for managing all of the cases and collecting the data. And then we ran every new case through a front-end assessment to determine its nature and complexity. And what we did as well is and this is, what the technical people would say, it's supported machine learning. So it's really a combination of humans and machines. We set up a defined set of criteria that were the typical variables in this portfolio litigation. So Bill, on the next slide, if you're flashing that. And essentially, because it was portfolio litigation, you typically saw the same common elements. But what we did is we fed our analysis, once we had set up these defined variables and set up the case management system and then ran the cases through the system and started analyzing how long each case took and how much they ultimately resolved for. What we were eventually able to do was identify those variables that would add increased cost and length, complexity, and ultimately settlement dollars to a particular case. So in the, obviously the examples, which are not the actual variables that we identified, but if the sleep number was a 9, the machine, we would know that factor, that variable, had a statistical likelihood of increasing the length of the case and the ultimate cost of resolution. And so what we were able to do once we had this data was cycle that back to the client, so that the client had data to get earlier settlement authority and higher settlement authority, and had the data to back up the request for higher settlement authority. And the end result was that the settlement strategy changed dramatically for the client, and we had a material reduction in total cost of resolution that you'll see on the next slide, that the litigation costs reduced by 2/3 using this system. And as obviously as we got more data, it got better, but we had a much better understanding up front as to what we were looking at, depending on the variables present.
Yeah, Andrew or Ryan, do you have any additional comments on this? Obviously, that's a pretty staggering number. We're talking about a litigation reduction by 2/3. Is this the kind of result that you see happening for enterprise businesses that are looking at managing these kind of costs?
Yeah, this is Andrew. I mean, I think certainly we're seeing it happen with forward-thinking clients that have control over their data. And I think, that's not always the case. And a lot of these projects start with data and looking around to what data points do we have either internally or externally that are available to us that we could leverage to make smarter data decisions and to reduce cycle times. So when I look at non-disclosure agreements, for example, we've worked with Fortune 100 clients who've taken 4-week cycle times down to 3 days with an automated solution. And so, their feeling is, hey, those results are staggering, and we've really gotten around a lot of the efficiencies we want. That's a little bit easier of a case because you're really talking about just a more efficient workflow and less back and forth between the parties. I think what Katie's done here is, it's quite a bit more sophisticated. But I think for firms and corporations that understand how to leverage data in that way, absolutely these returns are possible.
Ryan, any thoughts on your end?
It's a brilliant use case, Katie. I've often applauded Brian Cave's forward-thinking work in this area, and this is no exception. It's the first time I've had a chance to really hear your this particular use case, but it's absolutely brilliant. The thing that strikes me most in talking about this is where the pressure has been coming from, and it varies by firm. It varies by largely because of the sophistication of their client base. But asking your litigators, your lawyers who made a living off of trying cases and litigating and arguing cases, to even think about reducing their fees or their costs to their clients by 2/3 is a first really big ask. And so getting over that hump really requires sophisticated clients to be applying pressure on their outside counsel to say, hey, look, this is getting too expensive. And again, that's why we set out to reduce our electronic discovery costs, is because we had sophisticated clients coming to us and saying, hey, this is getting too expensive. What can you do to reduce it? So it's identifying business problems of your clients and really listening to what their business concerns and problems are, and using that as an impetus for tackling a project like this. our managing partner said to me several years ago when I was stepping into the innovation role and talking a little bit more about, how does he view the future of legal services? What problems is he trying to address and solve by, asking the business to think, the law firm to think more innovatively about how we deliver legal services? And he said something that really stuck with me, and I repeat it to our partners all the time, and also many of our clients. He said, the law firm is really what stands between businesses and the legal advice and knowledge and expertise that they need. And technology and access to information is really accelerated at such a fast pace that we're beginning to be in the way of that information expertise. And if we don't provide easier access and faster and less expensive access to the answers that our clients are trying to solve, the legal answers they're trying to solve, they're going to go around us. And so it takes that sort of vision, that sort of mindset for any business, but in our case, for a law firm business, to be thinking about how we approach our work differently and offering up solutions like the one that Katie just covered to our clients. And that's a very different world than we were in even just 5 years ago, and certainly 10 years ago.
Thank you for that. It jumps out to me anyway that we've seen a lot of recent cases and issues around cybersecurity, cyber breaches, and we're hearing advocacy out there for privacy advocates and others, kind of going back to Andrew's point around privacy in the EU. So you have large amounts of potential litigants coming forward whenever there's a breach of data. The Experian one comes to mind, but my goodness, Yahoo, you name it. A lot of companies now are seeing exposure to that, and these all get to this idea of having to deal with a large number of potential litigants or class action for any business. So it begins to make sense that in addition to figuring out as a company, what is our strategy going to be when there's an intrusion event or some other event, and how we're going to communicate around it, it sounds like there's a benefit here to how we plan in advance for how we're going to deal with this kind of a situation that comes out of a privacy breach. And we've planned for this instead of trying to make it up as we go along. So interesting thoughts for those of you out there. Along those lines, let's go to our next section of the discussion here, because we've talked quite a bit about some what's and some great examples of what's being done. But here's an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the how and what is best practices for moving forward in this. So for this, we'll turn back to Andrew again to talk a little bit about how do we go through a rigor of selecting vendors, testing, pilots, and moving toward implementation. So we'll start with you, Andrew, talking a little bit about what's the problem to be solved.
Yeah, sure thing. We always tell our clients, let's look at, some of the biggest pain points that you're feeling across your organization. And typically, it can be some of the more simple problems that are causing the greatest sets of pain. And so we encourage clients to start with sort of smaller projects that have a big impact, because the solution and the fix is going to benefit everybody, as opposed to some of those more complicated solutions that might, the solution might impact a far narrower set of stakeholders. When we look at complexity, the next slide is somewhat embarrassing, because apparently I said it at another panel. But we tell clients, start with one of your less sexy processes. We don't need to resolve Pythagorean theorem or anything like that. But let's look at what are some of your business processes that are highly manual and that are taking up the lion's share of time of your legal department. When we sit down with corporate legal departments, we'll often say, let's allocate your time. And what are the inquiries that you're getting, and let's bucket them out. And it's staggering to just go through that exercise and to see some of the highest volume inquiries, aren't all that sexy. And if we really got to automation at that end, we could really free up time for the legal resources in the department to focus more on, what is the strategy here, what is the more complicated work, and where should we really be allocating our time. When we think about, and you can go on to the next slide, when we think about sort of the successful components of deploying one of these projects, obviously certainty that AI is a good fit. If clients come to us and a use case hasn't been defined, we often say, let's back up and let's talk about, what are the more significant problems that your organization is facing from an efficiency perspective, from a costing perspective, or even from a go-to-market perspective. And do we need to change that? And as we think about use cases, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? There's a lot of very forward-thinking law firms that are looking at this, realizing, we want to productize some of our service delivery. Traditionally, legal services has been, hourly billing, and it's been a one-to-one approach where a lawyer is dispensing it to a client. But is there a way for us to productize our advice and deliver it in a more efficient channel from sort of a one-to-many approach? And then, what are the appropriate pricing models there? There are a lot of technology solutions that are now been deployed in the market that are more of a subscription-based or a flat fee and an alternative billing structure. And I think while that may cut against a business model of hourly time and materials, certainly that can be offset by volume increases because you're able to reach a far broader client set, with a solution that's far more scalable than it would have been in a one-to-one approach. A lot of our clients, when they think about use cases, they're looking at how can we make smarter data-driven decisions. And this gets back to the use case Katie was discussing earlier, but there's a wealth of data that can be leveraged to just have a better understanding of how we can improve the practice of law and how we're delivering those services. Business process automation, obviously that's some of the lower hanging fruit in terms of reducing cost, improving quality, but then also looking for greater consistency in the answers we're giving, right? Because if you have broad population of inquiries coming across 10, 20 different lawyers, they're not always going to come out with the same answer and the same advice. So when you look at some of these technology-enabled solutions to really automate the delivery of expert advice, there's a significant opportunity to increase consistency of that advice. It's important to level set that these projects require resources. They're not something that you plug into a wall and all of a sudden it's working. When we think about projects that involve machine learning or natural language processing, there's a training element where you need to spend some time training the system so that it can improve over time. When you think about automating the delivery of expert advice, that requires significant time with subject matter experts. And if you look at law firms, frequently, if you're going to build something that's productized, you want the experts at the highest level. You want to sit down with the partners that have the greatest amount of intellectual capital about, how would we dispense advice across various matter types? And so really being honest that we're going to need some significant access and time with stakeholders, and particularly subject matter experts, is important. And then just asking how does this project either complement or compete with our business model, and how are we going to manage stakeholder expectations around that? Because that can be very, very important for building consensus and for keeping these projects moving forward.
Thanks, Andrew. That was a lot to take in. We appreciate the way you've laid it out here. Ryan, turning to your work and the firm at Stoll Reeves, how did you assess, both an appetite for or the needs for AI-enabled technology investments, and how did you make your decision process? How did you take on this same type of decision matrix that Andrew's laid out here?
Well, we started much like Andrew suggested to start, is we started by identifying problems that need to be solved. And so that came through a couple of different avenues. One, I went out and queried all of our financial information, our financial data, our billings, to find out what our clients are no longer paying for. I'm trying to identify some trends where perhaps we're writing down more of the time we spend doing on things today than we did a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And so looking at some of our own data so that I could at least start the conversation with some of our attorneys to say, hey, I'm noticing this. We're writing down more and more time related to this. Let's talk about why. So it started by looking at some of our own business problems, which is we're performing work that we're not getting paid for anymore. But then engaging in conversations about what our clients are asking us for, and not through their request to write off or write down work that we're doing, but what else are they asking us for? What business problems are they trying to solve? and just started a dialogue with our partnership around those two issues. We then did an interview once I had a selection of ideas and use cases of technology. By the way, some of these conversations did not result in use of any technology at all, much less artificial intelligence technology. Some of it was just, let's stop doing that. So there was a lot of process review here as well that that led to, well, if they're not going to pay us for 50 hours of tax research anymore, and it only takes 10 hours of tax research to get to the answer to come to the same outcome, let's just perform 10 hours of tax research from now on instead of performing 50 hours. So some of this didn't lead to the use or implementation or acquisition of any technology at all, but some of it did, and so that was where electronic discovery costs, we were getting pushback from our clients wanting to lower those costs, led to that, where legal research is getting written off more and more and more. We couldn't charge even for not only could we not charge for the time, but we couldn't charge for some of the results of legal research, and so we looked at that one, but. Once we had some ideas teed up, I then went back and talked to our partnership again through surveys to ask, what they thought of this topic, what they knew of this topic, what their level of interest was, so I could gauge where I'd have the most energy, so that we could have some earlier wins and start with, smaller projects and just whet the appetite of the rest of the partnership for those who are on it. And so. That was how we first approached it, and then from there, I think you were asking about a selection process of business partners to help us. We went out looking for what was available in the market, invited them all in, talked to them about what our problems are and what we're trying to do to solve them, and then learn from them and as to how they would approach that and what technology they would bring to bear, and go through that like any other process, making sure that there's a fit between just the general philosophies of our thinking and their thinking, and then how their technology does it, and then you just move forward with a proof of concepts, and when you find one that fits, that's your pick.
Thanks, Ryan. During this section, we've had a couple of interesting questions come up, so I'll take these in the order they came in. First of all, Judy has asked, and this question came up when you were talking a little bit about selection criteria and the data points to be analyzed. Katie, question is, what front-end assessment tool was used? What tool was used to identify what those data points would be?
Yeah, so there wasn't a tool that was used to identify the variables. We used Minitab as our an analytical tool, but what we did was we had our. This is where I was saying this is kind of the example of the supported machine learning. That's a combination of human and machine learning, because it was really the attorneys who looked at the portfolio litigation and boiled down the litigation to 10 or 12 or so variables, and then the tool, as we would run the cases through Minitab, would start identifying outliers and consequences of those outliers.
Thank you.
And by the way, we also have used that for rate setting now. We've automated essentially our rate setting, because we've, any time where you have a constant set of variables, you can create statistics out of it, and so we've used this for internal purposes as well.
And there was a follow-up question to that, Katie, which was, would you be willing to share how you developed your word cloud?
Oh, I know that somebody in my group would be willing to share. But if I tried to share how we developed it, it would not make sense. I think I'm trying to think about what tools we used for that. I can find out, and we can follow up.
That's a great, thank you for mentioning that. So
yeah.
I'll remind the audience that we are recording the full session. That'll be available to anyone who can come to the PRP site. You do have to register. It's free as a download, but we do want to keep track of anyone accessing this, so it'll be available. And then Jeff had a couple of questions, and there's two, so I'll take them in the order presented. The first was, what do you think the business solutions are for an accountancy, an accounting firm, beyond just tax compliance for AI? I'll take that one, and then there's a follow-up question after we get responses. So for any of the panelists thinking about accounting firms and use of AI beyond tax compliance?
Contract review comes immediately to mind for me when I think about the key term extraction that happens automatically when we're using it to, and we're in the early stages of using it right now, proof of concept with 2 different products to pull out key terms and key clauses across hundreds or thousands of contracts all at once. But you could also use that, contract review type technology, which it implements natural language processing. Could even do machine learning algorithms in some of these contract review products to help you perform a risk analysis. Across 100 or 1,000 different documents and do it automatically and surface the data. It's more human-assisted AI than just pure AI, but you feed it some documents and contracts. You tell the computer a couple of things, and you say, go out and find me more issues like this or more key terms like this, and so it'll help you get through the contract review fast. That's the first one that comes to mind for me when I think of how an accounting firm might use AI, what a business solution might be.
Andrew, have you seen any use cases in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ryan's is a good one. We've seen clients developing apps not only around tax compliance, but just around calculations, where you take various scenarios and they want to understand, what is their potential exposure, and they're using calculation reasoning to come up with a more precise answer, which typically is a number.
Excellent. Just follow-up question is something that I'll put here. I want you to think about this question, if you will, panelists, as we go forward for the next few slides. Then we'll come back to it. His follow-up question was, when implementing AI, what was the makeup of your team? Who was on the team, and what were the roles on the team? So like I say, I'm putting that out there just so everyone's kind of got it in your mind. And then let's look at the final example that we had teed up on the next slide, Katie, something a little bit about your approach, because I think this will start to answer that question. Do it.
Yeah, and to give some broader context, I want to echo what Ryan said in terms of the importance of clients and the power of clients driving a lot of this. We always say that clients are our best friends in terms of pushing progress, and I think that's really, really true. I also think what Andrew said in terms of, it's not necessarily the really sexy stuff that's going to be the most beneficial. It's really kind of the stuff that will change your metrics and change the dollar proposition. The way that Brian Cave, the way that we have increasingly started to look at all of this is that, we see an opportunity. Law departments are increasingly pinched, as a lot of people on this call know. And there are ways for law departments to show value back to the company. There are ways for law departments to implement tools like this to increase efficiency and drive that strategy, and then show back to the company, look, I'm not just a cost center. We materially contributed to the earnings per share, or whatever it is. And so part of this in talking to clients is that conversation of, we not only want to create better, more efficient legal services, we want to help you demonstrate metrics showing your own law department's value. And so within that context, I've framed our process around AI evaluation in 3 stages or 3 acts. And Act 1 is understand, and this goes directly to the question, Bill, that was just asked in terms of the teams. We have two different groups that in Bryan Cave that evaluate and study both AI tools, AI off-the-shelf tools, and machine learning algorithms that we can use in-house. One group is the client technology and practice economics group. Those are actually two different groups. But within both of those groups, we have software developers, we have statisticians, we have data scientists, and those folks, I would say, the software developers and the data scientists really are focused on how can we use machine learning algorithms to creatively solve client problems. They are the groups, for example, that did the serial litigation and tool and tied that tool to the word cloud. Another group that we have within the client technology group is our automation group, and they are the group that works with companies like Robotics to create the expert systems and analytical automation, and so they are also embedded within that group. TechX is a group of attorneys of all levels, all across the world, who are sort of our what I call our tech-forward attorneys, the attorneys who are really curious about technology, really interested in how they can use technology to improve their practice and improve their client service delivery, and create their own thought leadership around technology. You know, we have attorneys now writing about AI applications and speaking about AI applications, and it's pretty rare to have attorneys speaking on those types of panels, and that's part of the point of creating TechX, is to really create, you know, that T-shaped attorney that has the deep expertise in their subject area, but has a working understanding of all these other areas so they can help solve problems as they come up with their clients.
Thank you. So there was your next section here about experimentation.
Yeah. So then, you know, the Act 2 is experimentation, and we create proofs of concept. You know, the proofs of concept could include, okay, it's like the Tasker tool. We've got to figure out how to make sense of the time narrative. How can we start figuring out how to do that? And essentially, you know, the client technology team and the practice economics group is a skunkworks of sorts of trying to figure out how to solve that problem. And then the external proofs of concept, that really relates to the off-the-shelf tools, where we have the attorneys who are part of TechX experiment with different tools like the contract due diligence tool, or you know, Neotologic tools and other types of AI-based technology, and think about how they can apply it to their data. We create pools of data for them so that they have the ability to run, you know, for example, their agreements through different types of AI technology to get different questions answered, and they're the ones really who come up with the proofs of concept, and then we help support it and test it. But that is you know, really, and I think part of the experimentation as well is really with the client. Is this meaningful? Is this useful? How can we use this to help you drive your own messaging back to your C-suite? How can we work together to combine technology and legal work products to deliver a different kind of legal service to you? And so I would absolutely say that we have many clients who participate in the experimentation stage with us.
Thank you for that. Ankit has an interesting question, which I think is probably well placed here, asking about what kind of resistance you see from clients or even other stakeholders about using AI and the technology in their business, and how did you overcome that resistance?
You know, I haven't seen resistance. What I feel like I've seen more of is a misunderstanding of what AI can do in present day. You know, we have people reading about the robot associate, and we have people reading about tools that can predict outcome of cases, and then, you know, or whatever it is. And then when they see it, they think, okay, well, I mean, this is interesting, but it's not what I thought. And so I think managing expectations and preventing as much as possible tech fatigue around all of this is important, you know, because AI is meaningful. It's going to become part of our everyday lives to the extent it is not already. And we need to understand it and understand where it's going and how we're going to use it. The only resistance I've faced, you know, with a kind of true to the definition of the term resistance, is concern around security. And you know, you know, we're getting closer to being more comfortable with cloud-based systems and putting information and data in cloud-based systems, but then we have a major breach. And that, you know, our firm is very conservative about data, as I think every law firm is. And so that's where we have to be really careful.
That makes a great deal of sense. Andrew, turning to you, you had put together some content here around looking at this process model and how to make these choices. So would you care to walk us through kind of the steps that you've identified? Because this also goes back to Jeff's question, and I think we can also come back a little bit to Ankit's as well.
Yeah, I think you know, I think Katie did a good job of covering some of this, but I think it's important to look at what are the skill sets required for these projects to be successful. And you know, people always ask, you know, who should build the apps if they're working on our platform? And the answer is it depends, right? I mean, it's someone who really understands process, logic. They need to understand the subject matter expertise of what the app is intending to accomplish. They don't need to be software developers. You know, most of the technology should be evolving or has evolved to no code, drop and drag, and it needs to be someone that has a high technical acumen and a high appetite for learning about technology, but they don't need to be deeply embedded technologists. I will say, when I come across a client like Katie, whether it's in a law firm or a corporate legal department, and they have data scientists and they have statisticians, you know the project is going to go really, really well, because they have a diverse set of stakeholders with a diverse set of skills. And obviously that really is positioning this for success. I think removing the fear and pandemonium is important, and this gets back to the earlier discussion about the robots. You know, you need to dispel some of that, because I think if people are focused on the robots are coming, it becomes a tremendous element of distraction. I thought that, you know, Ryan's point of of quantifying it as, hey, let's think about how we can use math to improve our practice. I think in part that's brilliant. I mean, math is something that's readily accessible. There's a lot of technology solutions that are out there today that we would have called AI years ago, and now it's just something that computers do. You know, this gets back to the point of solving problems with a broad impact. I think it's important to look at, you know, what is the volume of occurrence of an activity if we're trying to re-engineer the process. Because if it's something that we're only doing 3 or 4 times a year, do we really want to expend the resources on automation? And so really looking to, you know, the masses and those problems that have the broadest impact. I think if you look at how to break the problem down, which I think is on the next slide, you know, really looking at what are the inputs that we're going to need. I think this is often an overlooked part of the process. Do we have all the inputs we need? Is it coming from internal sources? Are there external sources? Do we need to buy some of those inputs? We can have clients come to us and want to solve problems, really not fully fleshing that out and realizing that, hey, they don't have all the data they need. And to get it, it might be prohibitively expensive, such that the ROI of the project is no longer worth it. So really looking at what are the inputs we're going to need and what are the outputs we expect. Do we expect an answer? Do we expect a document, a report? You know, and what is sort of the expectation on those outputs? I think Ryan talked a bit earlier about streamlining the process, and I think, you know, that's a really important component of this. And looking at what is the current process, and if you have process analysts involved, really getting them in to say, let's just evaluate current process, because if we're just going to move that process to a technology platform, we're probably missing an opportunity to improve the process prior to embarking on the project. And, you know, in looking at that process overhaul, it may be that a technology solution is the answer, but it may just be that process redesign is the answer, and you don't even need technology to solve the problem that you're looking at. When you look at what are the solutions out in the market, most of the solutions today in the AI category, they solve relatively discrete use cases, or they solve problems in a specific way. So really asking, look, if we're looking for identification, who are the providers out there on the market that can really help with that, or classification, or relevance when you think about sort of legal research, e-discovery, prediction outcome, or compliance, and really validating, are we in and out of compliance, but making sure that we look at what is the problem type we have, and is the provider experienced in this, are they a leader in solving this type of problem in that way. And then how do we measure sort of the ROI? Yeah, you can go on. And maybe just one more, really looking at how are we mitigating the risk, and how are we measuring the ROI? So when we think about risk mitigation, really creating some if-then scenarios, to do some disaster planning and saying, hey, if we automate this, how is that going to change? How our stakeholders interact internally? How might it change how we're delivering service to clients, to customers? And then managing stakeholder expectation about what is the accuracy rate. Because some of these technology tools today, they get you, 30% of the way there. And when you think about machine learning in particular, in some ways it's how OCR technology was in the 80s. It's good, but it certainly is not perfect. And so if we could improve the quality of the output by 30, 40%, is that enough for us to embark on this project? Because we walk into a project thinking technology is going to get us 95% of the way there, we're probably not managing stakeholder expectations as carefully as we need to. And then lastly, when you think about ROI, how are we going to measure the impact? And I think, this can bring a project to its knees on the front end, because the practical reality is we don't always know the best way to measure the ROI of one of these projects until it gets going. And so if we have clients that are spending a tremendous amount of time in the iteration process, how are we going to measure the impact up front? We tend to encourage them, hey, let's get a POC going. Let's fail fast, and let's try to measure fast. So really looking at how can we stop 30, 60, 90 days and say, yep, this is working, we're seeing forward progress, or no, we're not. Because I think the ways in which you want to measure progress become far clearer once you embark on a proof of concept. So we encourage clients to sort of start fast, work fast, fail fast.
That idea of fail fast is something that many people talk about, but not every company's culture feels comfortable with that. I'll note for those of you that might not have opened up the question window that Ryan has been kind enough to post some direct responses to Ankit's question. So those of you, this will all be included when we record the complete session, but you can see there that there's been some specific things that have been posted additionally on that. There was a follow-up question from Judy, which asks about handling training for the TechX group. Katie, do you have a quick comment on how that training is done for that group of worldwide attorneys?
Yeah, we've divided that group into areas of interest, roughly around M&A work, litigation, general knowledge management, and privacy, data privacy. But in terms of training, we really, we try not to take their time. We don't want it to be a committee. And so when they're evaluating tools, they do the training for that specific tool that they're evaluating. And otherwise, we push content to them. So for the attorneys who are using it to create their own brand and to present themselves as thought leaders in these areas, they really use their own time and we push content to them that we find interesting as it comes out, and it's more of a studious exercise for them.
Thank you. Ryan, your thoughts on this whole idea of how do you evaluate effectiveness, and then what's the communication process, and are you actually measuring these on a actual dollar type ROI basis, or are there other measures that make more sense?
Yeah, it's a great question for us because I get asked pretty regularly by a few of our partners, what's our ROI on this investment? And I've really struggled with answering it because some of the return is that we get to keep practicing and serving these clients. And so I've started a campaign of presentations at partner meetings that help to sort of identify all of the advancements in technology and investments we've made in technology over the years of practicing law that we would never think of in terms of trying to measure a return on investment. The BlackBerry is one of the ones that comes up as, we bought hordes of BlackBerries when that came out, and it changed how we practice and serve our clients. And nobody asked for a return on investment analysis on that, at least not when I was implementing it. Same thing, and then the iPhone came out. And there's just certain technologies that come out that just fundamentally change how you're serving your clients. And those were, in some part driven by, consumer technology advancements that we all just wanted to adapt. But largely they come from, clients who are asking us to be more responsive. Well, how do we be more responsive? Well, we connect ourselves at the hip 24 hours a day, 7 days a week so that we can respond to them. And it's attorneys then demanding of the business that you provide me with these tools and you make these investments. And so, I've been shifting a lot of my presentations internally over the last 2 years, but really over the last 6 or 8 months, to talk about how we are calling these things innovations and aiming them at delivering client value and being innovative. But my pitch to the partnership internally is that, guys, in 2 or 3 years, some of the things that we're making investments in now, both in terms of our time and money, are really just practice management. This is just how you practice law at some point. And so we need to be making these investments and trying these things, and that's why I go where the energy is, and that is usually largely driven by client demand, is trying to solve a problem that a client's asking us to solve for them. And then, as you get people to buy in on that front, they'll then be more apt to when you ask them to try something new, to say, well, yeah, we did a pretty good job that last project. Let's go ahead and give this a try, and you've got more appetite for it. But specifically on the measurements, we launched a strategic plan this year. It was released to our partnership in May, and the partnership has decided on a new direction. And as part of that direction, we've identified some financial goals and metrics, and one of them is to actually lower our cost of production. And so we're now measuring in terms, our revenues in terms of profitability, which I talked about in my answer to, ANCET is one of the things we're doing, changing our compensation system to be more aligned with profitable work versus just the number of hours we're working and the amount of revenue that's coming in. We're actually measuring the profitability, the margin on those hours that we're working. And so there's some real strategic focus in the firm that is aimed at lowering our cost of production. So making sure that we're delivering our legal services, the same legal services, for lower costs than we used to before. It gets into all kinds of great conversations, like different ways of staffing matters. Instead of using all a partner time on this type of matter, can we use a split of a partner time and associate time? Are there legal specialists that we can hire that are attorneys but not on the billable hour track or the partner track type attorneys who we can staff on matters and do this work? Is there technology that we can bring in to help us deliver the same legal service in a cheaper fashion? And so then that does speak directly to return on investment. And so now we are tracking across matters how much it used to cost us to deliver that legal service. And so whether it's labor and employment defense work, or it's employment engagement or non-disclosure agreement, or some collection of agreements that we're offering, how much did it used to cost us to deliver those, and then how much does it cost us now? Is the big metric that we're now watching and tracking closely as a firm, and that can speak directly to Well, we bought, $100,000 in technology. We hired $250,000 in legal expertise to have on staff to work on this stuff, and we now churn these things out at a cost of $332 an hour instead of $352 an hour, or whatever the numbers are. So, hopefully that is responsive to your question.
Oh, no, very much so. Thank you, Ryan. So as we sort of move toward wrapping up here a little bit, and this will allow me to come back to you, Katie, a little bit, you've kind of captured some common themes for the audience here. So as we take a look at those common themes, would you mind just kind of recapitulating what you see as these key elements?
Yeah, I mean, I think summarizing all of this is that it's important to create bandwidth, and it's also important to create buy-in, because it does take time. It takes investment. It takes attorney time. You can't just create a pool of technicians and then have an expert automation system. It requires buy-in from everybody. And so I think, I truly believe that top-down initiatives are critical, so that you have institution-wide support. And then the final element here that's so important is capturing that data. Andrew touched on that a little bit earlier, but if you're not capturing the data, you can't use it. And so you've got to figure out a way and structure to understand what data is important to you, and then figure out a way to capture it. And that's easier said than done. And then the final one, which is what we've already touched on, is you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that's hard for all of us. But as Andrew was saying, just get your proof of concept up and running, start playing with it and ideating what you can do with it and improving it. But if you create high expectations and expect a perfect system at the front end, you're gonna fail, and you're not gonna have the resilience to do it again.
Great. That's a great point, Katie. Andrew, a couple of last thoughts about getting started with AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think Katie's comments are well put. I think a lot of it is about bandwidth and buy-in, and just being realistic that it's going to take some extra time and energy to execute on one of these projects successfully. When you think about buy-in, I'm always looking for broad buy-in across the organization, whether it's a law firm or a corporate legal department, because it's very easy to find, at least it's much easier today to find an innovation partner in a firm that wants to change the world and make it happen. But, thinking about who are the other 6 or 7 people behind them, and do they sit in various pockets of the organization, it's extraordinarily important. So we often partner with clients on what are the things that we can do together to help build broader consensus and buy-in across your organization. And I think that's why proof of concepts can be so helpful. If you can show people some quick wins, you're really starting to build that groundswell momentum you need to execute on one of these projects successfully. And then the last thing I would say is I think it's important to assume that anything is possible. I think there are a lot of clients who approach technologies thinking, we can probably solve this, but we certainly cannot solve that. And the technology is evolving, and the outcomes that are possible, they're pretty significant today. And I think some of the use cases that are out there are starting to show that. But I would say it's important, as we move the market forward and really change the way that people are practicing law and leveraging technology, just to assume that, anything might be possible until we prove disqualification.
That's perfect, Andrew. Ryan, your final thoughts.
I'll keep it simple because I think my comments, the only thing I can add to that is just that. As Andrew started off earlier in the presentation, starting small. Thinking big is great, but start small. Keep it really simple. But as with any change management initiative, I also like to try and find the with them factor, or the what's in it for me factor. That works really well with attorneys when you're trying to introduce change, is to identify something that's in it for them, how it truly benefits them. Often that's something that benefits their client, but be on the lookout for what's in it for me type opportunities.
Thank you, Ryan. Any other final comments, Katie or Andrew?
I don't think so. Not for me. Still, thank you.
All right.
Nope, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You bet. Well, we've covered all the questions from our audience. I'm really appreciative. Everybody really stayed in there throughout the period of time in the webinar. Obviously, there was a great deal of amazing insight, incredible ideas, some pretty jaw-dropping numbers in terms of what those results look like. So I want to thank Katie, Ryan, and Andrew for taking the time to be on here. I know we're getting a lot of quality feedback in the background. Thank you all three again for being on today. I'll be sharing with you further results and everything here. And as mentioned, we'll be posting the complete recording of this on the PRP website, and we'll have that up and ready to go no later than the end of day Thursday of this week. And with that, we'll sign off and say thank you so much. Everyone have a wonderful day and a wonderful Christmas holiday. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
You bet. Bye-bye.